until 2018, and now continues to serve as a quality assurance expert at MQA and at many different platforms. This was amazing when I was going through his very long, illustrious career, and I'm obviously doing him injustice by keeping it really short. But Dr. Hazman has assessed more than 200 academic programs of higher education institutes at all levels of for the National Accreditation Board, for the Malaysian Qualifications Agency, even the Maldives Qualifications Authority, and as well as the National Agency for Academic Assessment and Accreditation. So he's a really well sought after figure, and it's going to share a lot of his experiences. And he's also participated in international, institutional, and program assessments all around the world, and training under the auspices of World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Asia Pacific Quality Network, the EU Share Consortium, and the ASEAN Quality Assurance Network. It gives me great honor and pleasure to actually introduce Dr. Hazman Shah Abdullah, and to thank you, Dr. Hazman, for agreeing to share your experiences and perspectives on today's workshop. So the floor is all yours. Zoom away. Yeah. We can't hear you, Dr. Hazman. We still can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. If you can just turn your audio a little bit more, that would be better.
I hope my camera is not picking it up. Can you?
Yes, now we can hear you clearly. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Now we got audio. Thank you, Prof. Habib, for the introduction, and thank you again for inviting me to be part of this annual gathering of people in higher education, particularly those who have a keen interest in quality assurance. And I can assure you, quality assurance is something that will never go stale. Whatever the changes in higher education is or are, whether they are planned or disrupted, as we are experiencing now, it will always be a topical issue because it's something that is extremely important and evolves with time and expectations. Okay, on that note, this is a workshop and we have quite a bit of time. 2 hours to be exact. And why don't we start with all of you go to this, you have a smartphone and you're in business, just go to www.menti.com. That's the passcode, it's login, and there are 3 very simple questions. And let's see what we have there. I'm going to stop sharing this slide and then go on to my, just a moment so that we can see, exit this. Let me share the screen with you so they can see what's happening on this front here. Okay, that's the 3 questions. You can move on to the if you're finished with the first question, you move on to the second question. Let me see if my slide moves. Okay. You are quite a few among you are quite familiar with these frameworks. That's good. Okay. You have an opinion about the frameworks. the global frameworks compared to the national framework. Okay, sort of even split, more or less an even split. Half of you have some experience doing assessment of programs or institutions, and the others are not. That's okay. But that gives you some insight into the understanding and also the experience of the participants present. Okay, I will. So that gives you an idea as to the participants, since you're not in the same room, so we can understand each other in terms of okay. So some of you have, about half of you have experience being an assessor. About a half, yeah, there's a distribution of in terms of familiarity with the frameworks, and certainly those present have an opinion about the framework. That's good. Okay, let me see if I can move my. Okay, that's what we are here for the next about an hour, 15 or 45 minutes. We're talking about global quality assurance framework, the topic that was given for this workshop. And I have quite ambitiously and maybe even provocatively listed it as developing a more grounded understanding, or even, and also a demystified understanding. Because when you talk about global frameworks, everybody has this great tool in mind that is going to, that will do great things for you. Let's see at the end of it whether that is so, or we have successfully demystified it. It's a tool, and like any tool, depends on how the tool is used, understood and used, and whether it's fit for purpose. So hopefully that will come at the end, but that's the topic. These are the three modest objectives I have for this 1 hour 45 minute session with you. Through the program, we're going to explore what our common understanding of quality assurance frameworks. That is a basic premise to understanding global, regional, even national frameworks. The second part is there is a little bit of an exercise to tease out what do you think from your perspective, from your understanding, from your experience, from your vantage point within the university. What are some of the characteristics, attributes, principles, if you like, or domains that you think are important to a global quality assurance framework? And the last part is the last section will illustrate some of these frameworks, global ones that are general, specific to discipline or subject areas, and also regional frameworks, and also some national frameworks to give you some comparative context to really appreciate what global frameworks look like and are intended to do, what they intend to do. So that's three basic objectives, and let's visit this at the end and see if I was able to take you through this. And this is how it will go. I'll spend about maybe not as much as that 20 minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes, just laying out some of the key concepts so that as we proceed, we are able to really understand each other. And there are some concepts and terms that are typically used in talking about frameworks and addressing frameworks. That's for better communication between me and your good selves, and also among the participants as well. There's going to be a short exercise. I'm mindful that this is after your lunch. You had already quite a long diet of QA matters in the morning. And now you have lunch, so this is afternoon. And so a monologue is the best way to put everyone to sleep. So there's an exercise where I use the Padlet to try and tease out your experience in terms of what are some of the attributes or domains that you have come across or you think is important to be in any, especially QA frameworks, quality assurance frameworks. So you look at that and try and, so that will tease out from an experiential standpoint. Your standpoint, what are some of these criteria? And hopefully at the end, I'll do some debriefing. So that's the second part. The third part is I have prepared some illustrations for you in terms of the frameworks, different types of framework from ones that I'm familiar with and used, for an opportunity to interact with those who are using this framework. So walk you through a sample of frameworks to give you. And the last part is actually, like in any good workshop, you need to actually reflect in terms of your feedback and your questions if you have any on this issue. And I'm sure there will be lots of questions, so there's ample time for that. So that's the roadmap for this workshop. With that, so these are some of the questions that everyone should keep in the back of their mind as we go through and towards the end and see if we've answered this. What are QA framework? Very common term used in everyday discussion, especially in the QA circles, locally MQA, regionally. So not only MQA, but also your network, Mic 1 also deals with this. So do a whole host of national QA bodies, regional QA bodies. So this is a common topic of discussion. What is the framework that guides our work, both within the university, internal quality assurance, and also agencies like MQA, ONESCA, MANPT, and you've got several in Philippines, and they work with this, right? And the second question is, what makes a QA framework, right? Why is it called a QA framework and not some other framework? So what's its unique features? And within that, an associated question, an important question for this workshop is, what is a global QA framework? When does it become global? Now everything is can be national, regional, and global, all at the same time. So what makes it global and what makes it national or even regional? And then the last question is, are our frameworks, that we are using at home here, not only in Malaysia, but I understand there are also participants from around the region. Particularly, I saw one name from Philippines, I think. So are we using globally relatable framework? Is our own framework that our institution or university uses, or our national body uses, relatable to global frameworks? Okay, so these are all related questions, and hopefully at the end we have some answers to these questions. So keep these questions in the back of your mind as we go through. I said as we begin, it is good to have some of these concepts laid out, so that as we go on and we're discussing, we know what are we referring to. And many of you are already in this area, so I don't have to labor this point. The word quality management is often used. Quality management is a very broad term, referring to that part of management in an institution which really focuses on the work that relates, focus on the work that relates to designing, developing, some would say verifying, but also in our case more appropriately, approval, recognition, delivery, control, maintenance, and eventually improvement and enhancement of your programs. Okay, this is a definition that relates to the context of higher education. So it actually, in many ways, refers to the management of a higher educational institution, because they are there pretty much to do this. There may be other things that are performed at the institution, but they may not be central to the mission. With this, so quality management is very much the management of what the management of education institutions entail. So it covers a large part, but there's a specific definition to it. It covers this. The second part, which is a subset of quality management, is what are the things that you do, that we typically do, to try and create confidence that we're able to set the standards, we're able to communicate the standards, we're able to motivate everyone in the institution and related to the institution to meet these standards. And not just meet, but from time to time also to take stock of how well you're meeting, and where you're meeting, what are the next steps to try and improve on the standards, or in short, exceeding the standards. So that is about confidence to the institution internally. So these are functions, these are activities, these are processes, they are people, they are roles, they are positions that are involved in specifically doing this part of quality management, which is to create confidence, trust within the institution, different constituencies within the institution, and especially outside the institution, right? It could be a regulatory body, JPT, KPT, it could be MQA, it could be EAC, all the professional bodies and any other bodies that you relate with. It could be another university with whom you're collaborating. They would like to certainly collaborate with someone with whom they have confidence or they trust. So this is a key part. And the last part, the last term is quality. Essentially is the outcomes, the attributes, the characteristics of your graduates. Eventually, all ends up with the kind of graduates that you have produced. What do they embody? What do they demonstrate? What are they capable of demonstrating? And what kind of outcomes that the program has actually produced in them that they carry with them to as they leave the institution and to the work world, and carry with them throughout their life, through lifelong learning. Okay, so these are three terms, and I have used fit for purpose as a common theme in all these three. So it's not just doing this, but you must do it in a way that is that produces the outcome, whether it is an education, graduate, research, or service, one that actually serves the purpose for which it is intended. And these purposes are different, and they also change over time. So that sets the stage for understanding quality management, quality assurance, and quality. And you can find some variations of this in the literature, but essentially it has this essence to it. We are talking about framework, we're talking about domains. So what are frameworks? It's just an organized set of domains, okay, or criteria, which is the basis for evaluating a program or an institution. Okay, so that's what, when we refer to framework, is actually a network of a series of domains that are tied together into a coherent whole. That is a tool to. This is the basis to assess an institution and provide some judgment. And the domains are basically broad, accessible areas, right? Institutional areas of practice. It could be curriculum design development, it could be about staffing, it could be about resources, it could be about learners, It could be about your quality management system. It could be about your data management. So then there are a variety of ways in which these domains are described, right? Between different countries, different frameworks, and of course within the context of QA frameworks is also principles, standards, expectation, thresholds, and benchmarks. Okay, so some of the frameworks are very extensive, some of them are very minimal. They stick to principles and some broad expectations. They do not go into detail. Some of the other frameworks do go into detail. So they lay out not just a principle, but maybe standards. And sometimes the word standard, expectation, thresholds, and benchmarks are they often mean the same thing, except they are much more palatable in the academic circles. Standard sounds to be very coercive and contrary to the idea of academic freedom. I mean, imposing a standard, it sounds very bureaucratic, it sounds very inflexible, it sounds very high-handed, and it's like an imposition, right? So it doesn't go very well with in the academic circles and higher education. So principles and expectations seems to sound more palatable, okay? Thresholds, right? Certain level that you must achieve or you expect to achieve, or benchmarks, right? But essentially they all point towards some level of achievement, performance that is expected as adequate, satisfactory, right? And the last one, they are indicators. Indicators are very specific, refers to processes, inputs, and outputs action, which if you have, and those are actually assessed directly. In some cases, those of you in research, you like to call it, these are indicators of constructs, and then the constructs have got first order and second order. So sometimes the domains, the criteria, the indicators are arranged in that manner. So indicators being where you are really measuring, and criteria like first order constructs, and domains tend to be second order constructs. If you like that language, then you'll be able to relate to that. Okay, so what are, okay, that's just quickly going through some of the basic concepts so that we all have a common understanding. So when we use this language, we can understand better as we proceed with getting you involved in this exercise. So for this exercise, what we're looking at is, what are some of the domains that you think is key to any QA framework? Doesn't matter national framework, regional framework, or global framework. That is key, that you must have it. If you do not have it, then it is defective, right? Number two, you can think of these QA domains in terms of inputs, process, output, and outcomes, if you like, just to give you a way to classify or a typology of domains, if you like. Okay, you can think, this is just to help you think about these domains. And hopefully at the end or during the exercise, we can look at it and see in what way a national QA framework, our national QA framework, Malaysian or Philippines or whatever the national framework in your case is, are they different in terms of this framework? Okay, hopefully that can help demystify some of the understanding. Okay, this is the exercise. This is the point where you are going to exercise your mind a little bit, right? All that food that you have consumed, I think this is the time to really put it to work. This is what we'll do, right? We have a small group, so I don't have a breakout session for this. This is a small group. So the whole purpose or the idea of this exercise is actually to try and tease out from an experiential standpoint, what do you think the domains or the criteria ought to be or should be from your standpoint? You can talk about this quite freely and frankly, so it may not have seen this in a framework, but I think it's extremely important. I'll be using this app Padlet for this. So just title it, give it a title. So learner success, and then you just give it a one-word description. What do you mean by this domain? So those are the two things you need to do. So for this exercise, the next slide has a QR code. Just scan the code and it'll take you to the Padlet, and you are in business. You just put in the passcode, and after that you can put a title, and then put a one line, maybe one or two line description, and then it will start appearing on the canvas, right? And as many as possible, but think more strategically, right? Think of this in terms of a whole educational sector. You're talking at a framework, it is usually addressing the higher education at different levels of analysis. I mean, could be a country, could be part of higher education sector, could be a whole region, could be global, national, right? Different levels. So think of it very strategically, and not so much in terms of very operational domains or attributes, but very strategically. What would be some of the top 10 domains that you think should be there? If not, it may not be considered very competitive or very useful or very effective. Okay, and I use the word parsimony. This is an academic crowd, a lot of it from the university. So one of the ideas in model building is actually parsimony, not to become overly complex, but complex enough, right? Complexity is not a virtue, it's a vice in modeling. So always keep this in mind, that we want to be minimal. At the same time, we expect, or we want that these domains to be inclusive and comprehensive as well. They cover everything that is important to a good assessment, which can deliver assessment outcomes that are trusted, okay, accepted by the institution, trusted by the others. Okay, this is the QR code. If you scan this, you'll go directly to the Padlet. If everyone is able to scan this on, I'll give you a few minutes for you to scan, then I'll switch on to my Padlet screen so that we can see what's coming up on the screen. I'll just let this on for maybe a minute or two so that everyone can. If you are already on the Padlet, right? So workshop on QA framework, then you can get busy. Okay, post as many as you want so that we have a lot of contributions to look at, and then see we can draw common ideas from the diverse inputs from the crowd. Okay, in about maybe 30, 40 seconds, and I'll switch to the other screen. We can see together what everyone is posting as the domains. Okay, now you can see the screen. SieQA, unmistakable, right? Global partnership.
Dr. Hazman, there's a
Yes, yes.
question on the chat that's actually asking if you could, sort of reiterate the question again.
Okay.
What you want them to answer.
Okay. Okay. Think of from your standpoint, if you're looking at a quality assurance framework, what kind of attributes or domains or criteria would you expect to see in one, right? That you think touches on something that is key, that is central, that is important to really doing a good assessment of the quality practices of institution, right? Okay, graduate employability regulation. Um, I have deliberately made this the posting anonymous, right? So your name would not come in. So it won't show authorship, but certainly will show your contribution. So you know what is there. Thanks, probably for the feedback.
Well, I have to earn my lunch, you see. So.
Okay. Okay. So that's good. Student satisfaction, industry collaboration. Teaching, learning, client focus. That's probably another word for student focus. Benchmarking. Graduate employability. Think of the top 10 that you think is the key, right? Okay, our canvas is getting filled up. That's good. Keep going. Don't worry if someone has already written it. If it comes to your mind, just post it. PDCA. Flexibility, practicality, employability. Okay. Diversity. Okay, plenty. Okay, we still have about 10 more minutes. All right. Yeah, 10 more minutes to really. Okay, that's a beautiful tapestry that I was talking about of QA attributes, domains. Many of you, these are very specific elements. Okay, they're more specific elements that can be subsumed under a larger domain. Okay, interesting. It is now we're in an age of data, right? Data science, big data, um, is managing this and is an important attribute that deserves to be raised to the level of a criteria or even uh, one of the 10 or 12 domains in the framework. Is it going to become, as opposed to frameworks of the past? Yeah, certainly we're talking about information feedback and for decision making, for understanding where you are in terms of meeting your own standards, expectations, requirements, and so on. So of course, you need information and information in the form of feedback from different groups of people at different points in time to understand this and take the necessary action to improve on and be better. That's certainly an implicit requirement in all of this. To make this happen, to make it effective, you need this. Information is the lifeblood of organization, and the messages travel back and forth. Actions get conveyed, feedback on actions get conveyed through this lifeblood organization. Today we are talking about not just data that is necessary for decision making. We are talking about big data that is coming in large quantities over a short period of time, and then it itself becomes so important to many things, right? Understanding many things as they are and as they are evolving in the future, from inside the institution, from new students, and also especially from outside, prospective students and different stakeholder groups through the social media, for instance. Is that important enough to be raised to level of a domain, a criteria, an attribute that a framework should make clear reference to? Can it be an implicit requirement? It's an implicit in many things we say, right? We are not directly addressing your data management capabilities, but that is sort of assume that in all the attributes and domains talking about, there is an underlying capacity to collect, collate, to understand draw information and data, insight, and act on it, not just reactively, but also proactively moving forward. Just throwing some questions in terms of what a framework, if you think about it today, must have, without which it may not be very effective tool in really analyzing or evaluating an institution and providing judgments about where they are, either in a competitive sense, ranking, or in the sense of providing feedback to the institution for improvement. You're not comparing, you're not rating or ranking them, but you are providing a robust objective assessment, which is useful, especially for the institution, to really take stock of where they are and what they need to do more, and sometimes also less. Okay, so that's quite. So we are at about. Okay, in about 2 minutes time, then we'll go back to slide and see if we can distill this into some second order constructs. Okay, so they'll give you some idea of what kind of domains are we talking about. Some of this you have mentioned, you posted, maybe touching on approaches and also values, certain instrumental values. Some of them are a bit more terminal values. For example, diversity and inclusivity could be classified as terminal values. They are outcomes that we value in and of itself, right? Not because what they are able to create or provide, but in and of itself, they are considered ends that we all want, desire. Some of them are terminal. I mean, they are relating to you become more efficient by adopting these values. So inclusivity, diversity can fall under that category, but they are also arguable. I mean, people can argue that they're also terminal values. Having diversity actually makes you more effective because you have got lots of a rich source of ideas and experience to tap from, so they can actually make you more effective. But diversity can be itself an end in itself, right? Diversity is actually reflects equality, right? So some of these are like integrity. It's implicit in all framework that whatever you are saying you are doing, whatever you are demonstrating that you're doing, whatever information you're providing that you're doing or you have done, all this actually done with integrity. That means we can trust and rely for judgment, the evidence, the information that you're giving. So it's implicit. So to the extent that that is lacking, then the whole exercise, the utility of this assessment against any framework will be called into question. Right? That is it's always an expectation that everything that the institution provides to someone, some agency, is truthful, can be trusted, and they are correct at that moment in time. They reflect the status of things, right? So integrity is always implicit in all the framework, because the process by which these frameworks are applied requires information from those that are being evaluated, right? So that is expected. Sometimes that's a challenge in terms of how truthful or how transparent the institution is in terms of sharing information about some of the things which may be considered very, very crucial, very strategic, and high value information. So it goes towards your sense of transparency and accountability, right? Okay, that's a lot. Thank you for reflecting on the question and putting your thoughts. It doesn't don't worry too much about whether they rise to the level of a domain or they are criteria or the indicator, because in this mix, they often get they all in the same pot. So the good thing is once you have this, then you can actually distill it into what looks like a framework from all this, right? I'm going to go back to the I'm going to go back to my slides so that we can continue with. So I'm going to stop sharing this and back to just a minute. Back to my. Okay, I don't know if we can hear. It's a bit of thunder and lighting over here. See. Okay. I'll just share with you. It'll take some time if I type on this one. Just looking at all the different inputs that came in. They can be actually thematically reorganized and assembled, classified so that you can actually draw from these things. One other thing is the different attributes that was posted certainly relates to stakeholders. I mean, some of them relate to them as employers, industry, but those are stakeholders. Stakeholders are groups that have interests in higher education or in the institution, right? So certainly it is a diverse group. They're not equally influential. Some are more influential than the others. So hence, institutions do have priorities among the stakeholders. So the stakeholders, I mean, the priority may be regulators come in first because they have got authority over these institutions, right? Could be KPT, could be MQA, could be other professional bodies, could be even other institutions involved in regulating the kind of institution that you are set up. Are you a company? Are you a cooperative? And so on and so forth. So this the regulators, that's one group. So among the things that's thrown in, the regulation or regulator was mentioned. So these are stakeholders. They all come under stakeholders. But among the stakeholders, you can actually prioritize them in terms of the attention they get in the institution because of their influence over you. In some cases, they have actually power or authority over you, but they're regulators under the law. They could ask for and require certain kinds of compliances, right? So you've got groups, and then beyond that, you have others who don't have authority over you, but have a lot of influence over you. Certainly your alumni, your donors, your industry groups, advisors, your collaborators. Universities typically have a lot of collaborators, and they have quite a bit of influence, normative influence. They are partners, are carriers of norms, standards. So they have a lot of influence in terms of imposing it on you through franchise arrangement, all kinds of collaboration. So it comes in through many ways, right? So, but they are one group, is stakeholders. So invariably, what happens in typically in any framework, especially national, regional, global framework, is stakeholder, right? So one of the domain will be stakeholders. Who are they, and how do you deal with them? How do you engage them in terms of impacting the institution. So it could be very broad impact, it could be very specific impact, it could be more frequent. So those are all issues that will be dealt with when you're looking at that particular domain. So one is certainly stakeholders. And internal stakeholders are always there, and they have very many different mechanisms through which they speak. Their voice is heard, staff, students, support staff. So that's already provided. I mean, that is already part of the management. So it's always recognized. The internal stakeholders are recognized. So although the word used external stakeholder, so when you're talking about staff or students, that's an internal stakeholder group that is already being recognized as very important, and there is already a particular domain or criteria that deals with them. So in terms of stakeholder, they're talking about, usually the perspective is looking at who else besides student and staff that impacts on your mission in terms of education, research, and service. So that's one. Certainly students. I mean, everybody, there was many reference to student. So students are what the institution, among others, is to serve, right? There was also other groups at the universities, the higher education institutions serve, but certainly students are a very important group that they serve. And they are considered as immediate customers or immediate clients. They are beneficiaries of the service, even though there may be other groups, employers, your funding bodies, government that you serve by providing service to the students. So there are people who pay you to do this. There are people who employers are actually expecting for you to serve them by serving the students. So there's whole nexus in terms of who you serve and who are immediate clients or customers, beneficiaries. So students certainly one group. The other thing that came out loudly is actually resources, right? Institutions, there are certain resources are already identified, staff as a resource identified, but everything else falls under these resources. And resource is a major issue, especially now when we're talking about STEM and TVET, right? So frameworks are now beginning to take notice, especially those that are looking at sectoral looking at TVET sectors or skill sectors or even STEM sectors. Resources are getting bigger eyeball these days, because without these resources, you are unable to actually provide the kind of experience that is expected. And also because the resources are expensive and they have very short shelf life. You have to keep changing your software, keep updating them. Your machinery needs to be updated very quickly, otherwise students are not getting there. So resources have always been an important part, but increasingly, especially for the STEM and TVET sectors, become a key, much more important, not just the basic infrastructure facilities, classrooms, good learning spaces, facilities, and so on and so forth, but very, very much in terms of equipment, specialized facilities, software, for instance. And when you talk about resources, not just the resources that you have, increasingly we're talking about resources who's actually with the others, the employers, apprenticeship to you to I is actually sharing their resources. So not just resources that you have, but also resources that belongs to others that can be also equally exploited or tapped for better teaching and learning experience. So we're also thinking in terms of, so that's becoming something more complex than simply looking at, do you have classrooms, the classrooms equipped, do you have enough, is the IT there, is the library there? There's a much bigger question. So yes, outcomes, or many of you mentioned graduate employability, you talk about OBE and things like that. It is the outcome of your mission, your education, your research, and your service. What are the outcomes? Certainly, in the last 20 years, the accountability for outcome has grown, and hence OB has come along to define your accountability better in terms of student, so that everyone can judge. The assessing bodies, your students, your funding body, parents, employers, lecturers, curriculum designers, they all can judge. So now increasingly it has come, but that's part of the outcome orientation. Yes, all frameworks now moving to outcome, not just output, right? Most of them are talking about are the students getting into the kind of jobs that you're training them for? Are they successful in becoming not just engineer, but also innovative engineers? So that outcome is always there, and most of the frameworks certainly now, if they were silent in the past, they're now actually making it very, very explicit, right? Many national frameworks, regional frameworks have been revised, and they're putting the word outcome in as one of the, or sometimes it is under accountability. What are you accountable for? So those, you're accountable for producing students of certain caliber, quality, competence at different levels for different groups, employers, and so on and so forth. So are you really meeting these requirements? There's one other thing that, several other things that came in is in terms of, you heard the word reflection, SieQA, actually is in all the framework, the capacity to actually not only have a system to run, operate, and deliver, but also equally have this capacity to self-reflect at different points in time as necessary. So there is a process to really not only organize and drive the service, but also to appropriate interval to actually step back, look at, collect the data, understand the data, derive insight, and then see, okay, what next? What do we do next? And that capacity is important, and that also came up through the different ideas that were posted. Ability to analyze, monitor, reflect, and enhance in a way. So SieQA, PDCA, this and also several of you mentioned values. I already commented on whether they're terminal values or whether they are instrumental values, but values are important, especially for national frameworks and also some regional frameworks. And especially in the context of Asian countries, the values are important, and at the national level, through the frameworks, these are promoted. Okay, when you're doing quality assurance, you're also checking for whether these values are being promoted, are being actively inculcated. So one of the things is values. Many global frameworks do not go directly into values because values can be quite contestable. Whose values? What values? Right? So they tend to implicitly stick to instrumental values, right? But a lot of the other terminal values they do not get into. But many national frameworks actually put it in because it's important to the country to preserve its own cultural identity, cultural uniqueness, and hence it's part of the framework. And quality assurance looks at how well the institution is actually prepared to and capable of inculcating this. Very tricky, but that's one of the, and certainly curriculum. I don't think I saw anybody use the word agile curriculum or fluid curriculum. It seems to be the thing these days, but certainly curriculum, because that's a plan, that's the blueprint to produce this kind of students or scholars or researchers or community service, right? That there is a curriculum at the heart of everything that the university does. However you want to describe it, as a blueprint, as a program, as a course, or generically as a program or curriculum. So that's at the heart of one of the important services that the university delivers. So the framework invariably will look at this and see how you go about formulating this plan to create value. What's your system to do it, and who is involved, and how do you keep this organic, fluid, and dynamic? So looking at this invariably one. Okay, so that's broadly, but you can actually cast them using the input, process, output typology, right? Many of these domains touch on the kind of inputs that is used in a typical institution, right? Staff, students, the governance, leadership, right? And all the inputs coming from your stakeholders. And then you have domains or attributes or criteria that actually relates to the process, which is actually operation, things that you plan and do to convert the mission through the program into with the students, with the staff, with a plan, with rules and regulation, all your SOP to produce a value and experience. And over time, it completes and produces a graduate with certain attributes and competencies. So that's and then what do you get at the tail end, right? You get graduates, you get research output, you get service from the industry, and then what's the outcome at the end? At the end, reputation. An outcome is created where you develop a reputation for producing employable students, competent students, innovative students. You develop a reputation for high quality research, maybe in certain areas. You develop a reputation for solving community problems, communal problems. So you end up with that. So you can actually organize this and classify this along those domains, which is a very popular, common way of actually organizing the domains for framework. Okay, having said that, let me look at, now we can look at and see how this relates to the stuff is out there, the QA frameworks that are out there. Although in this, we are looking at national frameworks, but you can't appreciate global framework unless you compare it with or relate it to national, regional frameworks. What are some of the national frameworks that you're familiar with, especially those from Malaysia? You would have been familiar with the Malaysian qualifications framework. Malaysian qualification framework is actually a quality assurance device, okay, and it goes along with the code of practice for program accreditation, okay, in short, COPA, code of practice for program accreditation, and there are also 3 variants of this. Code of practice for ODL, or open and distance learning, code of practice for TVET accreditation, and then there's a code of practice for institutional accreditation. So those are actually variants of, and together they represent our Malaysian qualifications, actually, Malaysian quality assurance framework. How do we quality assure? We have a national instrument that actually describes different levels of qualification, the different types of outcome in a very progressive, in an organized way. These are all explained in terms progressively more complex outcomes as you go from the lower level. And then you have the code of practice, which basically tells you how what you're looking at in the institution in terms of delivering these kinds of qualification, right? This is generic, and how you deliver. So together, actually, that is the national qualifications framework. It is not just the code of practice for program accreditation. They go together with the national qualifications framework, but they also sectoral frameworks. You know, there's one by JPT as well for Malaysian skills qualifications framework, which is a subset of the Malaysian qualification framework, but focusing on the skills sector. But so that forms the national qualification. There are regional qualification framework. Some of them are regional because they don't profess to be doing it for a country or within a country. For example, AUNQA doesn't profess to do it for Thailand, although they are based in Thailand, but it's not doing for Thailand. This is meant for the region, right? All the members of ASEAN, for instance. So it's not meant to address the needs of any one country, but it is addressing the requirements for an effective program or an effective education institution, right? Because they have both program and institutional accreditation. So their framework actually addresses, I'll look at a little bit in detail, but that's a regional framework. Then you have got lots of global qualifications, so quality assurance framework. I think many of this, if you are in business, you are familiar with many of this, ASCSB, EQUIS, AMBA, Embedding for engineering, and I think there's several others originating from Europe and UK for engineering as well, for architecture. These are national qualification framework, but they are also increasingly used to address accreditation beyond borders. It's not limited to the country of origin. It's now going, AACSB was American in nature, but certainly it has gone global, right? And same thing with ABET. It is like EAC for America, but it is taken on a very global outlook. So it accredits all over the world. They are specific to a program, or some of them are discipline specific, like the business accreditation that I mentioned. They are specific to a discipline, not necessarily to a program. Some of them are specific to programs, but they're global. But some of these didn't start as global frameworks. They started as nationally focused framework, but now they have extended themselves across the globe for a variety of reasons, because they're in demand. And in some cases, it's also sustainability. Increasingly, you need to look beyond borders to sustain yourself. And indicators, I won't dwell too much on that one. I mentioned briefly, this is the Malaysian qualifications quality assurance framework. Big picture, national picture, right? MQF, the standard setting, the accreditation or the evaluation exercise, the MQR, the register, and you have the parallels in all other ASEAN countries as well, the same thing. Together they form actually the national quality assurance framework. But often when you talk about quality assurance framework, we go straight to the criteria that is directly applied in quality assuring or in accreditation of an institutional program, those set of these things. But this is the big picture in terms of what's the QA framework for the country. This is a little bit more detail if you want to look at just COPA, our code of practice for program accreditation in Malaysia. So this is the framework, the QA framework. Although COPA is not organized this way, but you can actually reorganize it this way so that you get this input, output, process, outcome structure, which is easy to relate in terms of looking at from one end to the other end, from input all the way to the outcome. That's one way to look at. So that is what I'm talking about. We are very well connected to UK. Private public institutions traditionally, historically have been connected to UK. UK uses this quality, we call it the quality code, but it's actually their quality assurance framework in assuring the quality of the service provided by UK institutions. The QAA, Quality Assurance Body of UK, uses this in its review. They don't accredit the programs, they do 5-yearly review of the institution. So they use this, and these are the key areas that forms the basis for the review. Their framework is this, and then what you see on this end is actually the structure of the quality code, right? It has got expectations which you must fulfill or must meet, and then you've got practices. These are more mechanisms and activities that you carry out to meet those expectations, and they are common and core. But those are more about detail about how they understand the specific standards or expectations. But they have a framework. This is the framework that they use. Review. I think this is the latest review of the framework. AUN-QA I mentioned just now for the institutional program audit. They use this framework, which I say can be described as a regional, because the focus is not any one nation, but focusing on the region. Maybe in future they might even go beyond the region, but right now that's the region, and it does not directly relate to any one country or requirements in any one country. So it's broad enough, generic enough to actually use it on any institution in any one of the countries in terms of assessing its effectiveness and carrying out its mission. Right? That's regional. There is one type of global and regional quality assurance framework. These are frameworks that are not usually used on institutions or programs. They're actually used on national quality assurance bodies. And they are largely recognized as regional frameworks, right? You have one in Europe. It's ENCA is responsible for applying this framework under the European standards and guidelines. So I listed it there, ESG. Then you have got another body called INCAHI, which is an association of all the accreditation bodies around the world, not just Europe, but around the world. It has got its own framework to assess. These are assessing accreditation bodies, or your national quality assurance bodies like MQA and the like, right? And then in Africa, you have got ASG, and in America, you have Shah, which evaluates other accreditation bodies, and then you have got Asia Pacific Quality Register, which evaluates and registers agencies in this part of the world, Asia and Pacific. So there is that too, not focused on institutions or programs, but it will focused on quality assurance bodies, and definitely the quality assurance framework is a little bit different, because one part of the framework is about one part of the criteria, one set of the criteria, and also the domains actually relates to the institution itself, qualities of the institution, character of the institution. The rest actually relates to higher education institutions. The need to set standards, need to be very clear, and also reporting of this assurance outcomes, right? So that's another regional. We will describe this as a regional quality assurance framework with a difference. This is, of course, I forgot to mention this. We have one in the ASEAN region called Asian Quality Assurance Framework. This is the one that is indigenously developed here by the national bodies in this area, QA bodies in this area, reflecting ASEAN needs and uniqueness. And it's generally fairly relatable to what is happening in Europe and also in other parts of the country. This framework and the domains do not really differ too much, except the one in ASEAN has one unique feature that all others does not have, which is actually national qualifications framework. So that they have that element as well, because almost everyone in the region has or is very much in the tail end of adopting national qualification framework. So that's why it is in there. Many others do not put this as part of the requirement, implementing or referencing the national qualifications framework. So that's a little bit unique. But other than that, they are quite common framework. This one is AKAN, what it does within ASEAN. If you are in business, you are familiar with the triple accreditation. This is a quiz. So you can see the domains here is fairly relatable to what we did on the paddle, right? Students, programs or curriculum, faculty, staff, research and development, resources. This is actually can fall under programs as well. I mean, you have got not just formal programs, but you also have got lifelong learning, certification, and so on and so forth. So that is, and all this I encapsulated in three broad, if you like, second order constructs, right? They are very much into stakeholder connection with practice industry. That this is, you're talking about business school, so there is quite a lot of interest in and expectation about your connection with the industry. How do you connect with the industry? And then ethics, responsibility. So in business these days, this is almost inescapable. Ethics and responsibility, because of all the kind of impact that the businesses can have on humanity, right? And so this almost all businesses, business frameworks have actually adopted this as one of the key concerns, and of course internationalization. EQUIS is a European-based framework, and internationalization is a common theme these days. Okay, internationalized because of market, because of politics, and also because of sustainability, right? So internationalization is a key theme. That's the framework there. ASASB, that's the one that I mentioned as one of the global QA framework, but for business, it is specific to discipline, business and accounting as well. And this is how it breaks three broad domains, and within which there are subdomains or criteria, if you like, and which focuses on, again, the inputs, right? All the inputs. And then this is the value creation. This is the plan for the value creation. Your curriculum, your assurance of learning is actually OBE. How do you set and assess and assure that learning has taken place? And learner development, this is all the teaching and learning assessment, and eventually reaching the outcome. And teaching and learning effectiveness impact is actually the process part. So that's one big part. And then the last part is actually the classified as thought leadership, quite creative domain labeling. So they're not only talking about research and service to businesses and society, but they're talking about leadership. So not just being one, not just contributing to this, but evidence of actually getting ahead of the practice by either in terms of thinking, research and development, but also could be in terms of consultancy, service, problem solving, and so on and so forth. So three main areas and nine domains that breaks that way. This is another, unfortunately, I'm from the business area, so this is something that I know closely. So those in other areas, I'm sure you also know frameworks, and you can relate to, even though I've not included here, you can relate to them. Same thing. Surprisingly, the number is also 9, but actually the number 1 should have been taken out. It's not about a criteria, it's a requirement for the accreditation. You need to produce a portfolio or self-review. So actually 8 to be precise. And if you go through this, you can see it resonates well with what you are sort of experientially, intuitively throwing up on the Padlet, the canvas. It has many of this, but said, each one of these framework has a unique way of doing it. This is a framework for online, a global framework that was developed by an APAC group led by Texa from Australia, and many ASEAN nations were part of this project as well, because of the growing pivot to online learning, and also the challenges faced in getting recognition of online learning, whether online learning is within the country or actually is coming from outside the country through transnational education arrangements. So there is a framework that was developed for use. They call it a quality assurance toolkit. That is, and you can see, if you look at the inner circle here, very much includes all the things that we talked about here, except that it addresses a particular medium of learning that is online. So just as this conference is an online conference, so has been the teaching since the pandemic, and many have been doing this even before the pandemic, and they're doing a lot more since the pandemic, and there is a strong interest and call to continue this even after the pandemic. So this framework, and again, you can see the connections. Okay, and most recently, I think this came in last year. Most recently, many of you know this as NARIC UK. Now they're called INIC UK because of Brexit. And they came out with a framework, a global framework to evaluate T&E operations of universities. It is new. It's new, but addressing one particular challenge in higher education. That is when your education goes beyond your borders. The students are in another country, and the university is in another country. So you're talking about transnational education. So how could you quality assure anyone who has some concerns about this type of delivery? So this is actually a global framework. It is meant to be a global framework. It is not a European or UK framework. It is meant to be applicable to anyone who is offering transnational education. And transnational education simply means the provider is in one country and the learner is in another country, right? So that is one that can include. So you look at them together. Although we are looking at global qualification framework, global qualification framework has a cousin or a sister called regional qualification frameworks, and then and you have the national qualification framework. They do not actually exist in isolation. They're actually quite connected. And how are they connected? The attributes, the norms, the criteria are actually extremely relatable. And why are they relatable? Because they're looking at a typical educational institution or a program. And despite all the diversity across the world in terms of law, history, culture, management, governance, there are certain common themes that will come up when you want to talk about confidence or trust in the institution, right? The same thing anywhere, whether you're in Europe or in Asia, or whether in Thailand or in Malaysia or Indonesia or Australia, the same things. So whether they are national qualification framework, the regional qualification framework, or a global qualification framework, there is a tendency to revolve around the same set of domains and criteria. Where do they differ? And what makes them? Certainly national qualifications framework, by the very definition, tend to be applied to institutions in a nation. So they differ in that sense, and many of them do not apply this beyond just the nation. So in terms of application, it is limited to the national boundaries. Regional and global QA frameworks, from the outside, in terms of the scope, they are applicable across nations across borders, that becomes the key defining difference. So national qualifications framework can become more nationalized and contextualized to the needs of the nation, whereas regional and global qualification frameworks do not have that limitation. They tend to address common generic requirements across the borders. So that's the freedom they have, but they also lose this in the sense that they're not looking at any one particular nation's specific requirements. They leave that to the institutions to deal with what are your national values that you need to promote. They leave it to they do not actually dictate that in the framework directly. It is implicit. They are meeting all the requirements imposed on you, whether standards, benchmarks, expectation by your national bodies. So you need to meet them. So when they come in, they expect that this will be taken care of. They do not actually get into the debate, the issue of what values should or should not be promoted or not promoted. So they do not get into this. Whereas national frameworks tend to make very clear inference about values of unity, cultural preservation. So they go directly to this, and because they are more direct than and in the assessment that follows, the approach they take, they tend to inquire into a lot more actively and deeply into see how these values actually be promoted in the curriculum, in the research, in the service, in the management of the institution, and so on and so forth. So that connection is always there, but each one has its also unique differences as well. So there's a high degree of convergence, or if you like terminology, isomorphism. They tend to be like each other, recognizing the scope is a bit different, but they tend to be very much like each other. But where the difference often lies is actually the approach that they take. Many regional and global quality assurance framework applied in a more flexible manner, and as compared to the national frameworks. Part of the reason being, the national frameworks, quality assurance framework is, the approach is a bit more formalistic, sometimes even very coercive, because they tend to be applied by statutory bodies or bodies with statutory powers. They are given powers under the law. The regional and the global framework bodies are basically non-profit organizations, right? So their power comes from the contract and the normative influence that they have. They can terminate a recognition or withdraw something, but they cannot send you to prison or send you charge you a huge fee for some infractions, right? So the power situation is a bit different, and hence that sort of shape the way they approach and carry out the framework. So many national institutions in this bodies tend to look at regional and global and say the approach is more flexible. They are more accommodating. Some would say they're even friendlier in terms of the approach. This is the approach, right? How you go about using the framework, which is generally similar, but the way you approach it and the way you carry it out, the kind of documentation you need, and also the general tone and approach in carrying out this seems to be different. And many of these regional and QA bodies tend to take a more developmental approach, enhancement oriented, right? They're talking about what's capacity to enhance, rather than looking at and see in every nook and corner of the institution and see whether you are complying with some requirement, because they do not have too many requirements. They leave the requirement setting to the institution, and then they do make some judgments about whether your requirements are clear, they are competitive, they are benchmarked, they are healthy, they contribute towards effectiveness and things like that. They do make those kind of remarks, but they don't have one of their own. They let you decide. But in many national settings, this is pretty much prescribed for, and hence the question of inflexibility. And the last point is the what I'm saying, that we tend to have a very different perception of global QA framework. It's not so much the framework that makes them superior. It's actually the approach that they're taking that is more appealing. The framework is very much similar, as I said, similar to what you are typically exposed to. There's not too much that is different, right? But it is the approach. So many of them are not accrediting, they're reviewing, they're assessing. They do not say at the end you accredited, but they say this is the outcome of the review. So you can actually learn about yourself through the review in terms of areas that are strong and areas that you need to attend, and so on and so forth. So that seems to be more appealing to the taste of many institutions. Right, so that's tying them all together. So sort of going back to the beginning, these QA frameworks are not work of imagination, right? It's not imagination. It's actually distilled from everyday practice of institutions. What institutions do and what makes institutions better, greater than the others. So the criteria actually distill. So what you put out on the canvas is actually what typically happens in building this framework over time as well, right? So it's from practice. So all these QA frameworks actually emerge from practice and not theory. This is practice. This is practice, right? And as practice changes, these things will get refined, and in some cases also get changed. So I threw in the idea of earlier. Remember, big data is data management becoming a critical concern, a main domain. Therefore, should be reflected in the new. Many QA bodies looking at the framework are now thinking along the same line. Should we put this in because it's becoming more critical? Your capacity to manage this affects your capacity to do many things across the spectrum of the domains. Right. The second one, they differ in QA framework. Actually, differ. If you're talking about global quality assurance frameworks, regional ones are also global, except they have a smaller globe to deal with. Some of them cover the entire, but most of them tend to focus on English-speaking population, education systems in the world, all Western nation. So the truly global ones are very few, very rare few. Most of them are mainly or mostly global because they cover quite a lot of continents in terms of language as well, right? And they're all constructed around a common set of domains and criteria, right? We might actually post all kinds of different titles and names to it, but I mean, if you distill them, you reduce them, you're still talking about stakeholders. You're talking about curriculum. You're talking about students. You're talking about staff. You're talking about resources and facilities. You're talking about management system. So you're talking about outcomes of the institutions in terms of its mission, whether it's education or research or service. And of course, the level of prescription varies. Mentioned this varies. Global frameworks tend to be less prescriptive, more flexible. Many of them are now classified as principle based. They don't insist on rules, so they leave the rules to be looked at in terms of what the institution does, the rule that is adopted or required, and see the practice itself. And the last point is the approach to assessment is very much similar. Look at approach to assessment, right? In terms of eligibility, self-review, external review, or peer review, judgments on compliance, or judgments on compliance if they have a very strong standard, clear standard, or judgments about capability and capacity to deliver the mission and improve over time. So they may not talk about accreditation, but they talk about capacity and capability to deliver the mission as expected and also capacity to innovate and improve, enhance, and also periodicity. So these are common, global or local is still common issue. And okay, you've heard a lot from me. Now it's time for me to hear from you, or for us to hear from each other. I assume that the silence there was also in terms of thinking about what you put down, what I've said in my presentation about frameworks, and also you may have views on this as well. So now is the time. Prof. Abi, I hope I'm good on time.
Yes, you're doing really well.
Okay.
You know, we have about 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
So absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, folks, I saw about 31 still there. That's a good crowd.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Prof. Abi, is it time to switch on the cameras, or they still have to deal with the questions through?
No, it's up to you. It's really up to you whether you want them to switch on. I know some of the audience, you know, might have problems with switching on the camera.
Okay,
you know,
so it's an option. I will give them the option. If they want to be on camera, I'm fine, because when you're asking questions, it's good to
correct.
Let's say look into each other's eyes, maybe through.
That's right. Yeah, look into the eyes.
And even if it's a screen, I think
I agree. So I would like to invite all the participants, as what Dr. Hazman has suggested. If you can actually switch on your video, and then, you know, let's have you know, a question and answer session. But if you're more comfortable, you know, typing in your question, that is also fine.
Fine. I'll give you the option. So
right. Dr. Hazman, you know, I think you were
okay.
also saying that it was not just questions, right? It could also be reflections.
Yes, that's why I put on the reflection. So it's not just asking questions. It's
correct.
Not a Q&A.
Correct.
It's a question and reflections.
That's right. That's right. So everyone seems very shy. They don't want to switch on the videos yet, although we'll have a group photograph later on.
No problem. Okay, no problem.
Yeah, so I guess my question was, you know, Dr. Hazman, I think this morning when Prof. Perry Hobson was talking about international collaborations and obviously global harmonization of frameworks, and of course you kind of, you know, talked about this not conflict, but the tension that might exist between global and national frameworks. And one of the things that, you know, Prof. Perry brought up, it was essentially the fact that we should look at a lot of these quality assurance, as well as the desire to improve the quality, as more of a collaborative platform rather than one that is competitive. But, you know, to be fair, you know, that's a little incongruent because a lot of these quality assurance measures ultimately are used to benchmark and rank you know, universities and organizations. So in a post-COVID-19 world where, you know, we are realizing the importance of inclusivity, and, you know, you have rightly pointed out about how we are rethinking our domains based on practices. My question is, how do organizations such as Sunway and many of the national organizations in the ASEAN region actually assimilate their national, you know, sort of benchmarking focus with a more grounded, holistic quality assurance that serves, you know, whatever the intended purpose of the organization?
Okay, that's a very broad question, but I think it's a very pertinent question given the extent of internationalization in higher education that's taking place. First, responding to your question from Abi, first thing is, yes, the tension it will always be there, because the tension exists also within the national system, right? So there's so it's not just between national and regional systems versus the international system. But there are tensions within as well. And many QA, global QA, in this case, collaborations framework, when they apply to institutions in different jurisdictions, different regions, the institutions will now face some challenges in terms of, now, do I live with two systems? Each might have a slightly different approach. Like I said earlier, I don't think, if you look at the frameworks, they are very different in terms of the broad domains they're looking at. But where they differ is actually the approach that is used. Sometimes these approaches can be vastly different, and one could be very regimented, inflexible. Another one leaves a lot to the institutions to determine. So those kinds of tensions exist. And I think gradually what has happening is it's also a learning experience for many national and international systems. They are actually engaging, negotiating, and you'll find that there's a lot of movement towards harmonizing this. And there are many instruments already in the works that helps to harmonize this. One of which is we have a Asia Pacific recognition convention, right? Because at the heart of this QA system is, do you recognize us? Do you recognize our quality, our qualification? See, the heart of it is because at the end of it, you have got different qualifications being awarded to individuals. So would others recognize it? So I think there are already instruments. Now UNESCO has followed suit and has got also a global convention. Europe has been doing this since 90s, early 90s, when they went into the European higher education area. So similarly around the region, you can see they are working on conventions to try and provide the basis to reduce the tension and to create more integration. Harmony will come. Sometimes it's actually working towards some form of integration, and the integration requires engagement and negotiation. That's taking place. So over the years, I've seen this engagement growing stronger, the negotiations becoming more frequent, and I think they each understand a lot more of each other's position, and they're also working around how these tensions can be mitigated. Over time, this is actually you can see tension subsiding, but I think some tension will be there, given the nature, national versus global career bodies and things like that. It will always be there, as long as they are not paralyzing, right? They don't paralyze the institutions, from acting and changing, and they're still able to collaborate. I think that's the general direction things are moving, but still a lot of work, I suppose, need to be done. And one of the agents for doing this is actually the institutions, because institutions are the ones who can really inform others about the tension that they are actually facing. Others might have a vicarious experience, right? It's actually the universities, actually the faculty. So I think there's a lot of scope and room for this group actually to engage more and talk about the tensions that actually those managers, academic managers, lecturers are facing on an everyday basis in their classroom, in their teaching learning activities. Otherwise, it happens at a very high level, right? And tends to get a little bit more abstract. But it goes down to really to classroom level teaching and producing better value experience, things like that. It becomes a real, and people begin to connect, right? In the meeting room, in any global meeting, that seems to be able to have a much more powerful impact than talking in abstract terminology, diplomatic terminology and things like that. It doesn't go too far. I hope it provides some.
No, it does. It does. Thank you very much. And there's actually a follow-up question. I don't know whether Farah Farisha Mustafa, I think you're from Newcastle, right? NewMed. I heard you speak earlier this morning. I don't know whether you want to ask the question or would you like me to frame the question? All right. Your silence means
Okay.
I'll ask the question. So
Okay.
basically, Dr. Hazman, you did mention that we refer to a lot to the UK QAA and European frameworks. And I guess to a certain extent, it kind of builds on to what you just answered earlier. I guess the question is, what are the factors that make us choose or do this referencing? But I guess the bigger question here is, are we really moving towards integrating our national education frameworks to that of the UK and European frameworks? Is that really the general direction?
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you for the. I think in having our own national framework and also having a regional framework, um, we are setting ourselves up to integrate. You can't just integrate without having the relevant tools, right? So one of the tools is actually to have your own national framework, and then regionally we have also a framework. Now, and the formation, the very establishment of this framework actually looks at many others. Like in our case, we looked at Australia, New Zealand, UK, and many others who have done this before, and then try to build one that is compatible, compatible with the global practice. At the same time, it's also contextualized to Malaysian needs. So the very establishment looks at integration already. But over time, what has happened also is, over time, once we have this, we also look at and see, can we have more closer integration? For example, Malaysian qualification framework, level 6, 7, and 8 is actually a reference to New Zealand. That's a formal arrangement. I mean, so if you get a qualification here from authorized university, if you go to New Zealand, they would not do a complete evaluation of the qualification because it's already been done nationally, right? So we have a formal one. With Australia, we don't have a formal one, but we have very strong understanding of each other's framework because we are not only two nations teaching, but the nation has campuses here. Our students have been traditionally going there. So there's a lot of understanding around the qualification framework, although we don't have a formal one. It's very closely understood, so that there's not too much of. With Europe, there was talk for some time ago that the Malaysian MQA might want to do a formal referencing exercise with the EQF, European Qualification Framework. Why? Because that works out in many ways. One is our institutions that are collaborating with the UK universities will have an easier platform to collaborate because our frameworks are already formally linked to one another. And also if our graduates are going to go to Europe and work, if a graduate of Sunway, they want to work in Europe, that formal referencing will take away one of the barriers so that is already happening to try and integrate because it's not about university collaborating with the others. The graduates are actually going all over and working. So they're taking your award all over the world. So wherever they go, there will be questions about what is this institutions, what is this award, can we trust this, is this equivalent to our degree? These questions will come up, right? So that's why you need to actually connect and integrate. And our graduates are no more, I mean, they're traditionally in this country, they work in the region, they're everywhere in Middle East. And I'm sure in future, the borders are going to become more and more porous. They will be venturing even beyond. They're already in UK, I mean, in Europe, they're working there, they study there. From here, they go on to further studies, they stay there to work. So these qualification questions will always crop up. So that is something that not just Malaysian qualification agency, but all qualification agencies actually, even if they're not formally working towards integration, they're always keeping their mind on the frameworks of the others or frameworks of important others in terms of looking at their framework and how can we make it more relatable, right? So that institutions coming in, they can easily understand qualification, they can easily collaborate, and also everyone is looking to internationalize actually graduate employment for research purposes. So that's my response.
Yeah,
to
no, that's great,
part of-
Dr. Hazman. I think you actually also answered Anna Patricia's question from the Philippines, because I think there's always a perception, and maybe it's true, that our region obviously usually more than compensates and always looks outwards, and it's a lot more open towards integrating. But did you have a feeling that the Europeans and the British and the US also were the same? Were they also showing greater interest in integrating with the ASEAN region? And I think you did allude to your answer earlier, the fact that there's greater talent mobility everywhere, and now with COVID-19, probably more so, the need to internationalize their markets, perhaps more than ever before. And I think that's great. But there was also another question by Dr. Cheng, who is also chairing this conference. She basically asked this question in the context of global referencing. Are we also looking, when we think about promoting greater academic mobility among Asian universities, to what extent should our QA frameworks begin to accommodate or work with those of China, Japan, and South Korea? And maybe give us an understanding of how these East Asian countries, who seem to be rising up the rankings also, is also able to be heard today, that some of them, because of the language differences and whatever cultural barriers, it's not as easy to integrate. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, great question. It's not widely known to many that actually Malaysia signed a mutual recognition agreement with China probably about close to a decade ago. So in many ways, that is actually quite prophetic in the looking forward, right? So there is actually a mutual recognition agreement, which involves two lists, Chinese universities and Malaysian universities. So the list needs to actually be updated and improved. So there is already this look east in this referencing. It's not always look west. Australia, New Zealand, and things like that. These are traditional destinations, and we still use it as a benchmark. But for very practical purposes, institutions are already looking at, students are looking at, the government's looking at Japan, Korea, China. These are important Eastern destinations that we look at. And many of these QA bodies, but one thing for sure, we traditionally have not really examined the education system and the qualification system, the frameworks, as much as we did with the others. But particularly for Malaysia, because we had this looking east policy for some time, right? So there was quite a lot of collaboration between Malaysia, especially MQA, and Japan. Japan has multiple QA bodies, so to look at, and there has been mutual, what we call QA. This is not a qualification recognition, but mutual quality assurance recognition. So which means both bodies have examined each other's practices, they have visited, they have observed, and basically it's a statement, national statement saying that we trust your system of quality assuring qualifications. So we have with Japan, we have with Taiwan, right? With Korea, I don't think there's one in particular, but with China, we have actually a mutual recognition of qualification agreement. Wow. So it's even higher level. So there's work, but beyond this work, there's a lot of this work is done at national level, but at agency level, a higher level. But there's also a lot of work that need to be done actually at much lower level. This is actually the institutional level.
That's right.
Institutional level to understand qualification. These are actually to enable, to facilitate institutions from working with each other.
Sure.
So to the extent that institutions now actively go in and have, for example, joint degrees. So this kind of assurance come into play when you have a joint degree with a Japanese or Korean. Or they say, okay, how can we, our system similar, right?
Yeah.
So it assures them, yes, we can go ahead. They can talk to their board of governors and say, no problem, it's the same system. And we can talk to our board of governors, no problem, don't worry, it's the same system. So we are not doing anything that is not healthy here, things like that. So So I think that we have not reached a stage where we're going into those kinds of um, activities yet.
Sure.
So a lot of collaboration, research front.
But what I'm hearing from you is that there are actually already platforms that the institutions then
Yes.
can on. It's only in the interest of time, I'm going to allow just for the last question that NAB has, which I think is also very relevant. Essentially, the question is, how can we use our QA frameworks to attract student mobility coming into this region? I mean, how do you see these frameworks actually working? And in a very short 1 minute answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. This is basically marketing to the European students why they should come and spend some time here, right, with you. I don't think at that level you want to go into Malaysian qualification framework and so on and so forth, things like that. But what you want to deal with is how can they take this course that they're taking or the experience they're taking and translate it into, for example, credits in their own jurisdiction or universities, right? So many of these actually can be done at the university to university level, right? We have our credit system, they have the ECTS. So if you understand both, you can actually clearly tie them up and say, you can come and spend here, you get a variety of Malaysian food, you get an experience that is unbeatable anywhere, and you can also get credit to take home, and you can use it in your recognition, right? And this is how it translates. The platform is already there.
Okay.
But the key part is what's something new that you're referring that they cannot get it elsewhere, right? That is the marketing part. So I would not even go to the qualification framework. It's actually the offer. What is the value proposition from the university to the students? And that mobility is always about this level, right? Is this value proposition? Why should they come here and how would they benefit? And if you can do that very well, and I'm sure students will flock to your place.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hazman. I really, really enjoyed. I mean, I'm not a QA expert, but certainly, through your sharing session and the question and answers, I mean, clearly, everyone, definitely benefited from the session and really getting us to actively think about these domains and then revisiting to what the current domains actually are. That was excellent, and I just want to thank you on behalf of all the participants for really putting in all your effort to get us, at least closer towards understanding, what and where, the quality assurance frameworks is and where it's actually moving. Before we leave, I would like to actually have a group photo session. So can I have everybody to switch on your videos now? So that we can then have on gallery view, and I have our fabulous technician slash student slash intern, and really all-round talented guy to help us take this photograph. So yes, great. So we're having lots of pictures. We still have a few people. Let's give another 20 seconds or so to get Nur Shuhanida, Sharuk, Zalifa, Chin PY, Shaifato, Diana, Kausalia, Cochrane, Hang, Roshalina, Jagjit, Farhana. Let's try and do this. And let's, wait, let me just get this together. And then gallery view, let's pin Chong Watian. Okay, there are a few people who are on both sides. Let me just, is there a way to move? Oh, okay, all right. So, okay, everyone's on one page. So all we need to do is just smile. And then when I say SieQA, then Samuel will take the picture. All right, 1, 2, SieQA. All right, let's do again. 1, 2, SieQA. Okay, great. Okay. Before we leave, I hear that the organizers have actually made a short video from this morning's session. So we're just going to share that today, but we will also be sharing this afternoon session together with all the other breakout rooms tomorrow morning. So I'll share the link to you, Dr. Hazman, unless you're joining us tomorrow as well. That'll be fabulous. All right, so Samuel, go ahead and play.
intellectual learning of the students. Applications submitted in the respective instruments that are adopted.
Like distance learning. What are the things that we need to adhere? What are the project management tools like Trello, Trustful, Google Drive, right? And
the soft skills aspect
in terms of teaching and learning methods, assessment.
Now, sometimes universities get a very competitive mindset, and there's this curriculum. What will make the best pathway? There will be issues.
Hi everyone, Mabuhay from the Philippines.
Right, welcome.
Indeed. See you tomorrow. And that's exactly the reason why you have to give us the brightest smile in these photographs, because it's going to be captured forever. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all our guests and participants from across the ASEAN region, and as well as in Malaysia, and of course our distinguished speaker, Dr. Hazman. Thank you so much for your time as well as the knowledge shared. I would like now to refer all of you to this feedback form. As part of continuous improvement and quality assurance, efforts, we want you to now, spend a few minutes to fill up the feedback form for both sessions this morning and this afternoon. You can either use the QR code, or you can actually use the link that Samuel has kindly posted on here. You can play the music. All right, so you can do that at any point, but hopefully you do it today while the memory is fresh. I just want to say thank you, and tomorrow we've got an exciting lineup with great speakers and also your oral presentations. Who's going to win the 1,000 ringgit Best Paper Award? So lots of things to look forward to, and thank you very much. Stay safe, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye, same here. Bye.
Take care.